From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. From flooding to heat, how the forecast is shaping up for the heart of the growing season in the U.S.
Maybe a little bit of bad news, but for just about everybody else, there could be some good news in this July forecast.
What's 4th of July without some apple pie? Serving up a delectable destination as we travel the American countryside this weekend with Andrew McCrea. A near-death experience hanging on for his life.
I said, if things go bad, tell grandkids and kids that I love them and I love you.
Trapped in the grain bin for 6 hours, how this Kentucky farmer survived. An Olympic bound fueled by milk, how this dairy farmer, who's now a mom, conquered the chase for the Olympics once again.
U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Pioneer. More farmers choose Pioneer brand corn because it delivers game-changing yields. Join a winning team. Pioneer brand corn. Your best year starts here.
Now for the news, more layoffs hitting the broader ag industry. We began with Smithfield Foods announcing it's closing its ham boning facility in Iowa. The decision means 314 employees will lose their jobs in Altoona, Iowa. Smithfield says it's closing the facility and consolidating production at other locations in an effort to improve efficiencies in manufacturing. It says it will provide affected employees with information about opportunities at other Smithfield locations, along with severance packages. Smithfield employs about 4,000 people in Iowa alone. But Iowa has been rocked lately by other layoffs, including at several John Deere plants. The company announcing another 610 jobs will be cut. 280 workers are being laid off from its Harvester Works plant in East Moline, Illinois. 230 employees will be impacted at the Davenport Works plant in Davenport, Iowa, as well as about 100 employees at its factory in Dubuque, Iowa. It also said salaried layoffs in the U.S. are expected to happen by the end of this month. The company saying in a statement that rising operational costs and declining market demand require changes. The company employs 70,000 people worldwide. Staying in the equipment sector, more layoffs for the ag industry, this time involving AGCO. AGCO announcing in a filing with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission that it plans to cut up to 6% of its salaried workforce. The company saying that it is in response to its increased weakening demand in the agriculture industry. The global ag equipment manufacturer also recently confirming reports that Ohio Ag Equipment is ending its distribution agreement with the manufacturer at the end of this year. Ohio Ag Equipment operates 8 stores throughout the central Ohio region. And more farmers may have plans on cutting back on those equipment purchases. According to the just released Ag Economy Barometer, more producers are saying now is a bad time to make large investments. The monthly survey of producer sentiment conducted by Purdue University and the CME Group has an overall reading of 105 points. That's down 3 points from a month ago and down 16 points compared to a year ago. That's a 5-point decline also in the index of future expectations to a reading of 112, which was responsible for that overall decline. As new crop grows, farmers are holding on to a lot more grain than they were a year ago. The quarterly grain stocks report released last Friday shows that there are just under 5 billion bushels of corn in grain stocks, up 22% from this time last year, with a majority of it still stored on the farm. That's more than 3 billion bushels that they say is stored on the farm, up 37% from a year ago. According to John Newton, chief economist to the Senate Ag Committee, that is the highest level since 1988. And look at this map. Corn on farm in Illinois, it is up a whopping 71%. It's also up that much in Kansas. It's up 50% in Missouri, as well as South Dakota. Well, an important Supreme Court decision could have impacts on the EPA, environmental regulations, and other regulations in ag. The High Court last week in a 6-3 ruling overturning the so-called Chevron doctrine, handing rulemaking authority back to Congress and the courts. For 40 years, the Chevron doctrine allowed agencies to interpret vague laws. Experts say this change provides opponents a clear legal path to challenge regulations, potentially forcing agencies like the EPA to be more cautious in drafting rules. For instance, regulations related to farm subsidies, crop insurance, and environmental practices, including the Waters of the U.S. rule, could now face closer judicial scrutiny. Overturning the Chevron doctrine could also give more responsibility to Congress to directly address policy issues with new laws. Some ag groups say the decision restores a balance of power by ensuring that unelected bureaucrats cannot impose regulations beyond what Congress had explicitly authorized. That's it for the news. Well, the catastrophic flooding across parts of Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, they have been devastating. So just how big could the crop losses be? We explore that during weather next.
U.S. Farm Report weather is brought to you by H&S Manufacturing. Maximize baleage yield with less time and effort with the LW1100 line wrap bale wrapper. You can wrap round or square bales, and the automatic operating mode allows for a one-person operation.
Well, the flooding along the Missouri River has been catastrophic, and 18 river gauges along the Mississippi River are now at major flood stage, with more rain in the forecast over the next week. High river levels along the Mississippi and the Missouri River remain a concern, but the damage is already adding up. And for weather this weekend, Michelle Rook gives us a bird's eye view.
The complete loss of cropland due to flooding in the northwestern Corn Belt has been estimated by agronomist Dr. Michael Cordonier at 0.5 to 1 million acres, and that seems justifiable to ag meteorologist Eric Snodgrass.
I think it's reasonable. I mean, just seeing some of the pictures, for example, along the Big Sioux River or throughout parts of southern Minnesota, northern Iowa, then getting over into parts of Nebraska, and then again in South Dakota, a lot of low-lying ground just is not going to be able to drain fast enough to, to get those acres back.
However, there will be additional acres with yield loss from lingering agronomic issues like increased disease and fertility loss. At one point, Snodgrass says the National Weather Service had about 70 million acres under flood watches.
I was able to add up about 7 million, so about a tenth of that, about 7 million acres that picked up more than 6 inches of rain during that time frame, which meant we had a lot of standing water in fields. But the question as to whether or not we've lost lots and lots of acres is still one, I think, to be determined. So the question is, how vulnerable are we? I mean, does a half inch push somebody back over the limit to where they're flooding again? I think you're going to have a lot of places in northwestern Corn Belt where that's going to be the case.
And these are prime production areas, so the lost bushels could be significant when the combines roll this fall. I'm Michelle Rook for U.S. Farm Report.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, as we look out to July, what is the forecast for heat as well as moisture during the heart of the growing season? Well, the market is focused on that forecast and weather. So coming up in our marketing roundtables, leading meteorologist Eric Snodgrass rejoins us along with Brad Rippey, and we'll have a look at what could impact the crops coming up. Welcome back this weekend. Well, I mentioned it before the break, but we're taking a break from talking just about markets and talking about what the markets are focused on right now, and that is weather. And we have seen just an impact recently from multiple different weather events. We just talked about the flooding. Brad, when you look at the flooding that's impacting portions of Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, I mean, you look all over and the river levels. What is causing this torrential rain where you'll see 6 inches of rain in one area, and then you go just a few miles down the road and it's just 1 inch? You know, it is very localized rainfall right now, but it's heavy.
This upper Midwestern flood event really got its start back on June 20th through 22nd with repeat nights of heavy rain. And you can tie it to the fact that we've had a ridge of high pressure parked over the continental United States. For a few days, it shifted eastward. We got some tropical moisture, including the remnants of Tropical Storm Alberto wrapping around that ridge. And then a couple of cold fronts pushing into that ridge from the northwest. All of those factors coming together to unleash torrential rains, eastern South Dakota, northern Nebraska, all the way into the Great Lakes region, and sparking this regional flood event that continues to unfold as the waters work their way down into the main stem Missouri and Mississippi rivers.
Yeah, we are keeping a close eye on it, and especially the forecasted rainfall that could continue to cause these elevated river levels. Eric, do you expect this to continue?
Yeah, I mean, into the near term, the next 10 days, we've got plenty of evidence that the same flow pattern that Brad just mentioned is going to continue. So, what does that mean? We've had unbroken jet stream flow from Japan all the way to the West Coast. It's ripped across like almost right on the 49th parallel, right there at the US Canada border. And that's where those fronts are coming from that Brad mentioned. So as I look at over the next 10 days, we're going to be recycling local moisture. We still have plenty of Gulf moisture. And if there's heat, it's in the west or it's in the south. And as a result, we just tend to get better situation for more rainfall. Normally, if it was early July and I was saying that, I'd have a lot of people happy with me. But given what the situation is with the flooded ground and the rivers, this is going to be a problem.
Well, speaking of rains that are coming, NOAA releasing the 30-day precip outlook, calling for below normal precip in the Pacific Northwest and down really through the central and southern plains, above normal in the upper Corn Belt and along the eastern seaboard, as you can see here. Brad, do you agree with NOAA's 30-day precip outlook right now?
Absolutely. We've got this ridge that's pretty well established. It's going to move from day to day, but that is going to allow some of that Gulf and Atlantic moisture to work its way into these cold fronts. There's also going to be a component where the ridge is strong enough that it doesn't allow the cold fronts and moisture to reach into other areas. And so we are going to be seeing that drying trend across parts of the northern tier, Pacific Northwest, and on into the parts of the northern plains and upper Midwest, a little bit drier. But then there still should be plenty of moisture. As Eric mentioned, it's going to be an active weather pattern to start off July. Just about everybody east of the Rockies seeing rain at some point or another during the next 7 to 10 days. So from the standpoint of the upper Midwest, maybe a little bit of bad news, but for just about everybody else, there could be some good news in this July forecast with some scattered to widespread showers.
Yeah, so how does that play in then to the crop production picture, Eric? This is what the markets are watching really closely right now when it comes to precip.
Yeah, honestly, if we can get a little bit of drier weather into the northern plains and upper Midwest after this, no one's going to complain. And on top of that, we need some heat in that area as well. So some of the crops are behind. What I'm worried about is what's in the southern plains. So if you take a look at that particular map, you notice they've got this dry bullseye somewhere around, Texas to Kansas, maybe back over toward Arkansas, parts of Missouri. And given that fact we've got such warm ocean temperatures in the North Pacific and in the North Atlantic, historically that tends to anchor a ridge that sits right in that particular part of the country. So, it's always a situation every summer of who's stealing rain from someone else, right? When it comes to the way the pattern sets up. What I just worry is what if it gets stagnant at some point late July or into August? But overall, I think the CPC's got a pretty good handle on what we think we might see for July.
Well, what about the temperature outlook? Because we are already seeing some heat. Will that continue as we see the crop production picture progress? We're going to talk about that with Eric and Brad, but we need to take a quick break first. Welcome back. Well, Eric Snodgrass and Brad Rippey rejoining us to talk weather during our marketing roundtables this week. We talked about precip and the outlook for that. But looking at NOAA's temperature outlook, look at this. Above normal is what they're forecasting for much of the country, especially in the west and the south and southeast. The only area the heat zone really is not hovering, according to this forecast, is northern Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Brett, we've been talking about this heat, I feel like, for months, saying that we could have a hot summer. But what makes this so unique?
Yeah, so I'm looking for a little bit of good news in this forecast. You notice the little donut hole that is really focused across some major production areas of the Midwest. And that is, I think, the key to this July temperature outlook. If you picture the ridge of high pressure that's been dominating this early summer, think of it as the top of a trampoline. Somebody jumping on that trampoline, just kind of bouncing away. That would be the cold fronts trying to knock away the top of this ridge. The Climate Prediction Center thinks that there'll be enough bouncing on this ridge to keep temperatures down a little bit across the upper Midwest, maybe extending on into other parts of the Corn Belt. High probabilities of above normal temperatures as you move into the western U.S. That is probably going to be true for the deep south and parts of the east as well. So the real question becomes, how much can we keep this ridge knocked down during the critical month of July?
Eric, last year we had that wildfire smoke that kind of was that blanket protecting against the heat. We're not only talking about the heat this year, but also looking at the minimum temperatures. Dallas-Fort Worth recording the highest minimum temperature earlier this week with a reading of 83 degrees. That beat the previous record of 1998. And so when you look at not only the high temperatures, but also the minimum temperatures, is that concerning for you for the crops?
Yeah, that's been a concern all season. We thought that this would be a year that was a hot summer, but a lot of that heat coming in overnight lows that were so very warm. But you got to remember, when you keep the overnight lows so warm, you're also pumping a bunch of moisture into this. Now, here's something else to think about with respect to Brad's comments, though, and it is going to be if we do not bring in, some deep, what I'll call decent heat into the upper Midwest and that part of Iowa. And remember, we have a lot of farmers in Minnesota and Iowa and parts of South Dakota that planted in late May or had to replant in late May, early June. Issue there is that if you plant like 105-day corn in late May, your first frost date runs into before you'll be black layer. And so there's some concern in that area that we're kind of like, we need some heat, but just keep us under 92. It'll just be the trick of keeping away the excessive heat for long enough that we can get the factor of it, what we need, which would kind of put the GDDs into the crop, but stay away from the excessive heat at this critical month of July and early August.
Well, Eric, real quick, speaking of heat, speaking of drought, I know you're keeping an eye on what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and you're getting a lot of questions from farmers right now about the heat and the drought picture there.
Yeah, I am. And it's really coming from the point of like, why are we not getting a market reaction out of this? Because you go into parts of Ukraine. I mean, remember, you can fit 3 Iowas inside of Ukraine, and you get into Western Russia, and we've got a huge area that's been under, at times, some exceptional heat. In fact, the next 10 days are expected to be 15 degrees above normal with not much rain. So we've already been looking at the NDVI data showing major drops. In fact, some of those same locations are having the lowest NDVI values they've had in 20 plus years. And we're just curious if this pattern maintains itself in the US, does it keep the same thing going over in parts of Eastern Europe and Western Russia? And I think there's a lot of reason to think there could be.
Okay, Brad, real quick, summarize things for us. I know we're keeping an eye on the flooding. We've got pockets of drought, but also areas that continue to get moisture. Summarize, what is your outlook when it comes to temperatures and precip for the core of the Corn Belt this summer?
I think we'll make it through without really critical heat. That's the way it looks to me, with a lot of heat again staying west, south, and east of the heart of the Corn Belt. One wild card will be the Atlantic Tropic Basin, incredibly active already so early this season. That could infuse some moisture into the southern and eastern United States, possibly even the Midwest as we move forward. As we know from past years, even dry years, soybeans can benefit from late rain. So that's something we'll be keeping an eye on.
Brad, Eric, thank you so much for taking time to join us this holiday weekend and talk weather. We really appreciate it. We need to take a quick break, and then we're checking in with Machinery Pete for Tractor Tales. That is next.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales. This week's something special for you, a pair of John Deere 110 garden tractors with some unique colors.
1969, John Deere tried to market garden tractors that were not green and yellow. Instead, all chassis came in dogwood white, and the customer had their choice of April yellow, spruce blue, patio red, or sunset orange. And it was a marketing disaster. By 1971, dealers were recalling these things and painting them green just to get them sold. So today, they're pretty hard to find. Obviously here we have a April yellow tractor and a spruce blue tractor. In 1968, when John Deere started floating the idea of doing these custom color tractors, their design team at the time was up in a tall building, and they looked out the window and saw the parking lot below, and they noted the four most common colors of cars at the time, which were red, orange, blue, and yellow. And they decided, that's it right there. We're going to make tractors that if you're a suburban homeowner, you can buy a tractor to match your car or match the color of your house. And hardly anybody wanted them. The blue one was one of my grandfather's tractors. He bought it as just an absolute disaster basket case. It was literally a tractor in pieces. And this was the first 110 that I restored pretty much on my own. This one is an early 1969 tractor. That one's 1970. And there are several identifying features between a 1969 and a 1970. 1968s are very unique because they feature the four-legged jumping deer on the headlight panels and the steering wheel center cap, or what I like to call the horn button, even though they don't have horns. In early 1969, when this was built, it was a transition model. As a result, it has a two-legged deer headlight panel and a four-legged deer horn button. I have sentimental attachment to the blue one, but that's a 50-footer. Looks great from 50 feet away.
Thanks, Greg. Well, it's a near-death experience that one Kentucky farmer survived and is sharing his story so that others don't fall into the same trap. The emotional and terrifying story is coming up next.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition.
Life can dramatically change in an instant, even when you think some accidents can or will never happen to you. But for one Kentucky farmer, it's a miracle he's still alive after being trapped in a grain bin for 6 hours. And he agreed to share his story to prevent it from happening to you. Clinton Griffiths has his dramatic and emotional rescue this weekend.
These are the precious moments Doug Omer nearly missed.
We thought we were being safe, and we let our guard down for a second, and it almost cost me my life.
May 4th, 2022, Doug and his father Mike started the day hauling a couple of loads of corn. The first load went perfectly, and Doug spent a few minutes at the top of the bin waiting for the truck to get back.
The bin was a little over half full. We were kind of on red alert. We had a little bit of a scum coming on top of the bin.
Typically, just an 8-minute job. Doug eased into the bin to watch for clumps that might clog up the works. A rope was there, but he didn't tie off.
I guess we'd run probably 20 seconds, and I hear this shh. What is that? And I turned around, and here it come. Well, I was somewhere top of my boots in corn, and when it hit me, it took me about to my bottom of my pockets and moved me about 20 foot right over the hole. I was right there. I was one sheet over that, right there. Oh, wow. We weren't too far apart. He was hearing me.
I heard a big bang, and I thought a bucket come off the leg.
And I'm not real smart, but I knew I didn't have enough Doug hanging out for 8 minutes. So I'm beating on the bin. Well, it's getting up in here and starting to kind of mash life out of me. And me and Jesus had pretty damn good talk. And I thought, this is how you're gonna die in this freaking bin. Damn bin full of corn, this is how you're gonna leave here. So I got my arms and got me a big breath, and I just, with every ounce of my being, I started beating on the walls.
Then I heard another bang, and I knew a bucket hadn't come off the leg because I'd already shut the leg down.
I got down to about right in here, and I had already laid my head back to give me a few extra seconds, and I hear it most every night, that breaker kick on top. It's kind of a shoom.
Everything stopped. Doug was trapped, buried, and fighting for breath as the pressure squeezed the life out of him.
It's 66 steps. He's 72 or 3 years old. It seemed like a split second he was up there. Our cell phones are terrible right here. He said, you're in bad shape. I said, I'm in bad shape. He goes, I'm coming in. I said, you can't come in. I said, the phones don't work anyway. You come in here, I'm a dead man. I said, you're gonna bury me when you come in here. You gotta stay outside.
Instead, Mike called 911.
Hello, 911.
We got him uncovered and he did up, but we just can't get him out.
We tied the rope onto him, and we gave him two real good tugs, and we couldn't even shake him.
I wanted to call my wife. She owns a flower shop right beside the fire department.
I answered it, and it was Doug, and he said, I just called to let you know that I'm drowning in the grain bin. And I'm like, what? And he told me again. And he said, I just want to call and tell you I love you.
I said, I'm hung in a bin. I said, if things go bad, tell grandkids and kids that I love them and I love you.
That started a 6-hour race to save Doug's life as more than 200 emergency personnel, neighbors, family, and friends worked to pry him from death's door. Crews brought bin rescue tubes that they had trained on just the week prior.
Them tubes are only 28 inches wide, so I'm pretty snug. And they went to digging.
A battery-powered cordless drill drove a 3-inch auger, pulling grain slowly out of the tube. 2 hours went by.
Well, when they had moved me, I'm sitting about like this. Come to find out, I wouldn't fit in the tube. They hit my right kneecap.
They added a second set of tubes and went back to work. Doug needed IVs and oxygen. By hour 5, he was ready to do anything to shake free.
I wanted to cut my legs off. I told him, I said, you bring him in here. I know he took blood. I know the helicopter's here. I'll end this. I said, I'll just stick it down in there and cut till something pops off. Y'all work on one, and when we get that deal, I'll cut the other one, we'll leave him. I was hurting that bad.
You're in fear because he's in there so long. You was in fear that he may lose his legs. You know, he may come out alive, but he may lose his legs.
They were going to cut the bin if I fit in the tube and let it suck me out and try to dig me out. I'd had 25 minutes of oxygen. They had enough manpower here, they was going to just let me hit the ground. I wasn't for that. But when I didn't fit in the tube, they said it would dismember me and I'd bleed to death before I suffocated. So that took that out.
Back in the bin, with enough corn moved away, a team of 3 grabbed Doug's harness and pulled.
And I went screaming, you move me, you move me, you move me, and instantly it hit me again. They moved me about 6 inches. Well, they felt that. Again, they hit me a third time. Well, the third time, I'm standing up inside the tube.
His hips, knees, and ankles were dislocated and had to be pushed back into socket. Then he worked his way to the top of the bin.
Everybody started cheering, and it took him a while to get down the steps, but he walked down each step.
Tell me about that moment.
Glad
He's live.
His family met him at the bottom as he was ferried to a life flight helicopter standing by in a field near the bin. While in the air, his body went into shock from the hours of pressure. It was like he'd been deep sea diving for 6 hours.
I run my hand up in this headset, and it was full of blood. And I looked at Lainey, she's sitting right here, and I said, this can't be good.
The helicopter dropped as low as possible, and doctors rushed Doug into the hospital. His joints were reset, his vitals monitored, and at 11:30 p.m., he walked out of the hospital and headed for home.
Come here, Pumpkin.
2 years later, the gift of life continues, thanks to hundreds of unnamed hands.
Everything just worked out so perfectly. And you don't think your hometown people can be heroes? But they was our heroes that day.
And if you ask them their advice for other farmers working around grain bins,
don't think it can't happen to you, because he was 54 years old. He's around them all of his life. And it's that one instant that almost got him.
Just stand back and look at it before you bail in there. I mean, most farmers, they're all self-employed, and you get wound up and get in a hurry.
Taking time to think about safety, even on small jobs, could be the difference between a quick end and a long and happy life.
Wow, what a story and a miraculous ending. Thank you, Clinton. Well, when we come back, a water fight is playing out along the border. Ag Around the World is next. Now for a glimpse of Ag Around the World, another potential border conflict is brewing between the U.S. and Mexico. As Rosa Flores reports, this one is all about water, or how the lack of it is putting American farmers at risk.
Just turned 71 and growing citrus. That's always been my passion.
Jose Silva, a citrus grower in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas, takes us to a grove he hasn't irrigated since January.
Well, this grove is about 25 years old.
To show us how his life's work could be in peril due to lack of water.
As you can see the leaves folding and the fruit, how small it is, because we haven't been able to irrigate like we should.
The culprits, he says, are both natural and man-made. There's the years-long drought that has reservoirs along the Rio Grande at all-time lows, according to Texas water authorities, and a dispute between the U.S. and Mexico over an 80-year-old water treaty that has Silva and many Texas farmers blaming Mexico for their misfortunes.
If we had water from Mexico, this grove would be irrigating right now.
I'm in South Texas. Under the 1944 treaty, Mexico, which you see over my shoulder across the Rio Grande, owes the U.S. about 390,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of water so far this 5-year cycle, which ends October 2025. When Mexico released water to the U.S. in 2020, it sparked violent protests from Mexican farmers. Currently, about 90% of the country is enduring its most expansive drought since 2011.
We have a 1944 tratado.
Mexico's foreign ministry points to that years-long severe drought and says it plans to meet its treaty obligations by the October 2025 deadline. But it's too late for some farmers. Not only have some citrus growers pulled and burned their wilted groves.
When you see this, it's just heartbreaking. It just breaks your heart.
The entire South Texas sugarcane industry is dead, forcing the state's only sugar mill, a $100 million business that employed more than 500 people, to close in April, according to this man. Do you blame Mexico?
Yes. I mean, this is not an act of God. This is a man-made situation.
Tudor Yulhorn is the chairman of the Rio Grande Valley Sugar Growers. So is this equipment going to be sold?
Yes.
And says a group of 90 farmers went from harvesting 35,000 acres of sugar cane and churning giant piles of sugar like this one to producing less than 10,000 acres in February. Do you in part blame the State Department for not forcing Mexico to provide the water?
It's definitely the fault of the State Department because this has occurred under Republican administrations and it's recurring right now under a Democratic administration. You start to feel like maybe the State Department doesn't care about you very much.
The State Department tells CNN that the agency continues to urge Mexico to make water deliveries and continues to work with Congress to resolve the issue.
We have to check with the water districts.
We're in a crisis.
It's at meetings like these that Jose Silva advocates for the water he needs to save his wilting groves.
Is there something that maybe you guys can do to...
But after much discussion...
And I'm sorry we couldn't come up with a better solution for you, but...
The outcome was, there's no water. Could this mean that some of your groves die?
There's a good chance, yes.
It's really heartbreaking. It really hurts. It really does.
Thank you, Rosa. Well, is there any hope left in the corn market? Chip's Corner is next. Well, welcome back to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Chip's Corner, Chip Flory joining us. Chip, we did not spend our marketing roundtable talking about markets. Instead, we spent it talking about weather since that is what the market was focused on. So let's talk markets in Chip's Corner this weekend because, I mean, you look at the USDA reports, just a really negative reaction in the markets. There have been some positive signs this week after the report, but gosh, I mean, it is depressing to look at where that corn market's gone.
Man, when we added about 1.4 million to the planted corn acres, when we added about 120 million bushels of total supply through the quarterly grain stocks report, it added those bushels compared to trade expectations. The market reaction has clearly been negative. The corn market's reaction that day was severe to the downside. And the market is still trying to figure out exactly what and where we go next. The funds have built such a big short position in corn and in soybeans, but particularly in corn, that we've really got to find a trigger to get the funds to shake out of those short positions. And just exiting the short positions might be enough to give us some kind of a counter seasonal rally in the middle of the growing season. I had a conversation with Sean Hackett Financial Advisors, earlier this week, and he thinks the development of La Nina could be that trigger to get the funds out of the shorts.
We went back and did a study that on every time we saw the Southern Oscillation Index reach plus 30 in a transition year. And it was really the moment of truth where we truly switched the atmosphere over and kept a more La Nina type pattern. So I do think that this reset of a hot July onward is going to be more persistent And of course, when we think about a hot July, August, you could really have some fireworks with the soybean market if this were to carry through.
Okay, so trade the week of the 4th of July in 2024 is going to be disjointed because the break comes in the middle of the week and on Thursday. That's not the same as having a 3-day weekend for the 4th of July. So don't trust the trade that we see the week of the 4th of July. Let's wait until next week. Let's let traders come back, get a belly full of an extended weather forecast, and let's let that be more of an indicator of what we're going to see for the corn market into the second half of the month.
Chip Flory, you can catch him weekdays for AgriTalk AM and PM. Chip, thanks so much. All right, when we come back, if you are searching for the best apple pie in the country, we have a place that you may want to try. American Countryside is next. What's the 4th of July without apple pie? Did you know apple pie is actually associated with the 4th of July because the holiday celebrates independence from Britain, and baking apple pie carried a similar meaning for early colonists? And if you're on the hunt for the world's best apple pie, well, a restaurant and bakery in Missouri should be on your list to try. We travel the countryside with Andrew McCrea this weekend.
1983 was a difficult year for Mary Hostetter. She went through a sudden divorce and found herself needing to provide for her 2 young daughters. She hoped to find a way to work from home.
I thought if I could just stay at home and bake cookies and bake pies and things like that for people, then maybe I could make enough money that I could be able to stay in our house.
She began to go to craft shows and sell her cookies, pastries, and pies. People could buy items on the spot, but also place orders for future events and the holidays.
By the Christmas of 1984, I had orders for over 30,000 Christmas cookies that had to be made in my home.
After the Christmas of 1984, she found a location in Kimmswick, Missouri, along the banks of the Mississippi River, where she could open a restaurant and bakery. She quickly became known for her amazing pies.
The butterscotch pecan pie, oh my gosh, talk about the love of pecans. This one has butterscotch morsels inside of a pecan pie filling. It has a pound of pecan halves on top, and it's drizzled with a caramel butterscotch glaze. So you will definitely get your fill of pecans in this pie.
The showcase of pies was bringing in quite a crowd, but then in the summer of 1993, rain simply would not stop here and throughout the Midwest. The Blue Owl's location along the river was suddenly in the path of a 500-year flood.
We had time to build a levee. The levee was built to withstand a 50-foot crest. It took weeks to build that levee and make it strong enough.
The water rose to 49.9 feet. The 50-foot levee held, and the town and Blue Owl was saved. Mary wanted to do something to say thanks to those who had volunteered to save the town's homes and businesses.
We decided that if we could build a pie that resembled the levee that saved the town of Kimmswick, maybe that would be something really positive for people to enjoy.
The Levee High apple pie, as it became known, really stood out in the display case and caused some confusion as well. People thought they were pumping air into the crust, or perhaps just stacking whole apples inside. It was actually a marvel of dessert architecture.
The apples for the big pie, 18 apples, were hand peeled and sliced at that time. They were each hand placed.
That's right, 18 full apples sliced and hand placed into one pie that can reach 8 inches tall. Quite impressive. And then a caramel topping was added to the outside to resemble the rocks and sandbags that topped the levee. This pie is so famous, people come here to first photograph it, then to eat it, and then study and try a multitude of other choices. Between Thanksgiving and Christmas, people come here to enjoy a dessert and then buy pies to send to others.
We ship so many apple pies all over the United States, and they probably make more apple pies than any other pie. People have seen all of, the hits that we've gotten, and they've seen us on a lot of different shows and things. So they come from all over the world, which amazed me.
They say that every Levee High apple pie has 18 apples, and that means this piece has over 2 apples. So instead of dessert, this is probably just a good, healthy meal. Traveling the countryside in Kimmswick, Missouri, I'm Andrew McCrea.
Okay, that looks delicious. I am adding that to my list of places to try. Thank you, Andrew. Well, when we come back, as the U.S. Olympic team takes shape, a dairy farmer made the cut once again. thanks to her speed. From the Farm is next. Well, proof milk only makes you stronger. A Vermont dairy farmer turned running star is heading to the Olympics once again. Ellie Perrier St. Pierre won the 5,000 meter race at the U.S. Olympic track and field trials last week in Eugene, Oregon. She also set a trials record and finished in the top 3 for the women's 1,500 meter race. Perrier St. Pierre finished 10th at the Olympics in Tokyo in that race. She's been in training to compete this year since giving birth to her son a year ago. We've told you about Ellie before. She grew up on a 40-cow operation in Vermont. She and her husband still live on a dairy farm. A mom, a dairy farmer, heading to the Olympics. How cool is that? I don't know who I'll be cheering on. And we're less than a month away from the Paris Olympics. Those games will happen Friday, July 26th through Sunday, August 11th. So mark your calendars. Well, that's all the time we have this post 4th of July weekend. Thank you for joining us. Join us next weekend as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.